part 2, and we're going to go right into Hosea where we left off. Isaiah, where we left off. We were dealing with the Messiah. And to recap, this post was about, this video was about us understanding just how far we've fallen away from the reality of the truth concerning our people and why we suffered so long. And the critical need of us to get back there before many more of us perish. Christianity and Islam and wealth and riches and adultery and all kind of other things just completely dominate our lives to where we're not even concerned about the Most High and our fate and the covenant of our fathers, or our eternity for that matter. None of that just doesn't matter. But it will. Picking up where we've left off in the last video, part 1, it says that who has believed our report? Who is the arm of Yahweh revealed? And to whom is the arm of Yahweh revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form, no comeliness. And when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of Yahweh, and afflicted. We attacked, and this is deep, because we basically looked at him as though he was like people do when you're trying to bring them the truth. They tell you that you're going to hell and you're a devil and you're cursed of God and you're all of these different things. Isaiah is saying they did this to the Most High. It says the flesh was the word of Yah was made flesh and dwelt among men. And this is how they treated it. So he was wounded for our transgressions, and he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and his stripes we are healed. And we like sheep have gone astray, and we have turned every one to his own way, and the Elohim had laid on him the iniquity of us all. That means Hebrews, because that was the one that we are the people that Abraham sprinkled that blood on. Nobody else. And he was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. And you know that from the story of the Gospels, he didn't open his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before her shearers is dumb. So he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was there any deceit in his mouth. He was yet it pleased Yahweh to bruise him. Yet he put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of Yahweh shall prosper in his hand. And he shall see the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And he bare the sins of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. And this is the heritage of our fathers saying this. That's why I chose to go here instead of the Gospels. For those who struggle with the authenticity of the Gospels. Gospels are intact. Name has been changed. And the writings of Paul are excluded. Because he was an Edomite. He said he came to the Gentiles. Most High told the disciples, don't go to the Gentiles. That's why paying attention to what he's talking about. But for your own information, you should read it, and you'll be able to see the stark differences between what's written in the narrative of the Hebrews and how he teaches them. He teaches them to be basically lawlessness, which is you do whatever you want to do, and because his Jesus paid for it, he was crucified for it, that everything you do is covered in the blood. It's the most wicked, sinful, blasphemous thing I've ever heard. Most High never gives us a reprieve on sin. But the thing about it is that we're in the land of captivity, so everything's suspended. That's the reason why Hosea said that you don't gonna have no king and no prince and no offering and no sacrifice. And that's the reason why I showed you this. It's because this is the sacrifice. Messiah sacrificed his son. He sacrificed his son. The same way that Abraham did the goats, and Moses and Joshua and David and all of them did the goats and the lambs. He was treated like that, but worse, because they bruised him and afflicted him. So what I'm saying is that there is no room for you to serve an image and a man who's nothing more than that. And it not be the specific man who did this for us, who was a Hebrew, who was of the lineage of all of these prophets. His mother Mary came from his father is the Most High. That's why his father looks at it as him. He looks at it is him. Goes through the whole thing. This is the testimony of John describing the whole thing when it comes to the Messiah and the Most High. And it's incumbent upon you to find this out for yourself. But I went to Isaiah to show you that in Isaiah, that this is recorded in the Old Testament, that sacrifices that the priests were making. The Messiah was going to do that. But you got to believe in it. It's the reason why he says, talked about faith. Let's look at faith. Always talking about faith. Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? What were they believing? It made him say that they didn't have any faith. Him! They didn't believe because he came as a black man. Coming as a black man after the Most High had divorced us, as we read in the book of Hosea. We were in the same condition we were then as we are now. So just imagine the Messiah coming today as a man in the manner in which he did, not in his glory like he's coming now, but in those days like he came. Just like a man, like he says, lowly riding on an ass or jackass. or mule, not the chariot, not the magistrate that kings would have came in. Just like I see anyway, anybody that's speaking the truth without all of the superficial fanfare and all of the notoriety and the fame and the respect and honor of everybody, nobody pays attention to what you're saying. Like I said, they didn't esteem him. The scriptures tell you they didn't esteem him. But his purpose was to be that sacrifice. That's why there is no wiggle room for you in terms of who you believe and who you trust. You're going to believe in him and only him, and that's the black one. That's this one. That's this one. He said he seen one like the Son of Man clothed with a garment down to the feet. So you couldn't see his face. You could see his hair and you could see his feet. And he says his head and hairs were like wool. Black people got hair like wool. And it was white as snow. It means it wasn't gray. Gray and white are two different colors. And his eyes were a flame of fire. And his feet was like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. This is fine brass. This is fine brass. Burnt brass. Fine burnt brass. No white man I've ever seen look like that. No white man I've ever seen look like that and have stringy blonde hair. And this is another thing I want to show you about the Christianity and the fact that when they talk about Christians and how Christians are, a race of people before it became the religion that, when the civil rights movement came in and they started integrating churches and integrating all of that, you started to see sort of a relaxing of that notion that Christians were always exclusively white and black people were slaves, or black people were considered Africans. That was the way everything was distinguished for the first 300 or so years here. And listen to this lady. She's the Roland Martin show. And she is a historian, a professor of history. And I believe she's at a HBCU and a very prominent historian. Well, anyway, she's talking about the history of us so we can make a distinguish. And I'm only showing this to show you a distinguishment of that even though you were considered Christian, it never gave you a position to where it changed your state and your salvation or your captivity, or it circumvented any of the curses that the Most High gave on us when we broke the law and he divorced us. So apparently, Christianity wasn't the answer, nor has it become the answer in these 400 years. So let's listen to her.
So I want to go about this. What you're saying is that during this period, so of course, post in 1619, that people of African descent had rights, but then laws began to get changed that took away those rights, voting rights, property rights. Can you unpack that?
Sure. So the colony did not have a clear system of any kind of enslavement in place. There were no laws. In fact, Massachusetts, the Plymouth colony in particular, was the first to create laws. I believe it was in 1641 to enslave those Africans who were arriving. But in Virginia, it would take until the 1660s before we would see some clear laws put in place. Now, what we would see in these early years are Africans being treated more as servants. Now, there's a difference between an indentured servant that had a contract and those who did not. There were some English people who had been kidnapped and made to be in bondage in the Virginia colony. As long as they didn't serve more than 20 years, that was allowed because anything after 20 years was seen as slavery. And we would see many of the Africans who were arriving actually file freedom suits, claiming that they were Christians and they could no longer be held in bondage beyond a certain point in time. And we started to see those particular freedom suits by the 1640s, 1650s. And that suggests to us that people were trying to hold them longer than a maximum of 20 years.
Wow. Wow. Any questions from panel?
Can I ask real quickly? First of all, Professor Newby, thank you for your work, first of all, and your ongoing work. How important is it for us to understand the difference between English enslavement and the Spanish and French versions, which were more based on religion, like Catholicism? The English, of course, couldn't do that. So it sounds like when these Africans began pursuing those enslaved by the French and the Spanish became the issue, the question of religion. England couldn't base its form of unfree labor on religion. Is this when they began to tease out race as the way they were going to do this?
Yes. In fact, what is interesting is that a lot of the English ministers who were arriving in the colony in the 1620s, 1630s, actually began to write about people of color. And in fact, by the time we get into the 1650s and 1660s, they're clearly stating that there is no way that these individuals could be Christians because they were black. So they were defining Christianity and whiteness as somehow synonymous with one another. That was not the case with Catholicism. So that is really why in the English colonies, there was not the same kind of protection of human rights the way that we would see that written into the Spanish and Portuguese and other Catholic-oriented colonies. But that's not to say that the people were treated kindly or gently. There were still allowances by owners, even in the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, to really use people.
Julian?
Sister, I really appreciate your work and thank you for it. I have a question about 1619 because there's a part of it to me that seems to be a false narrative. In other words, the first black people did not come here in 1619. There were some other black people here before that. And I think we need to sort of unpack some of that. Also,
we will at another segment.
Okay, but the other thing about the 1619 narrative, always smack me down, but whatever. The other piece about it is the extent to which it really lifts up the British and doesn't look at everything else that was going on here. So it becomes a whiteness narrative. So I'm interested in your perspective on that because as I read it, it sounds like the Brits and white people are taking away what was really happening in this country pre-1619, which included Native American people.
Let me figure out what card, guys. Now, where to find the best?
Give me a commercial. You know how YouTube is.
Well, one of the reasons why there's a commemoration for 1619 is because even though the Jamestown colony was founded in 1607, the reality is that the Jamestown colony, which later became the Virginia colony, was not going to survive for the most part until 1619. When we saw the creation of the first limited legislative body, that really set in motion the idea that this colony would now survive. You had a body that was making laws, that was creating a court system and so forth. And so it was at that time that we also saw the evolution of a system, a cultural system, a legal system, as well as an economic system. Now, while blacks were not dominating any of those systems, they became in some ways victims of those systems, especially the legal system, that almost immediately began to demarcate them as different. When they came in, they were not called by their ethnic name or by their name for that matter. They were simply regarded as black people, Negroes. And that really was very different than any of the other servants coming in. However, they had authority to some degree or standing before the courts because they were filing lawsuits against their owners for holding them too long, punishing them harshly, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I talk about 1619, I try to emphasize that we're not talking about these are the first Africans who were on the North American continent, but rather these are the people who at the real founding of American society and culture in the first colony of the nation were there at its formation, and their culture, their activities, even their presence sort of laid the foundations for our society, culture, and especially our laws.
Greetings, Doctor. You're doing some excellent work, and I want to thank you for it. I have a question. You referenced earlier that even though the legislation of enslavement happened in the 40s and later, in terms of the 1600s, that the bad treatment still occurred. So my focus is on the treatment, because I traveled around the footprints of enslavement through the Caribbean, throughout the continent, throughout this country. And one thing I found out about people in the Caribbean and other parts of the diaspora is that they still have some direct African sensibilities. Sometimes food, sometimes accents, sometimes cultural practice. And a lot of that has been domesticated out of African Americans. And I'm wondering, during the time of 1619, when did the domestication and the lynching and the terrorization start then, or did it happen parallel to the removal of human rights completely later in the 40s to the 60s?
Why don't you, the landlord?
It's a timely commercial.
You, the landlord.
In the 60s until the 1600s.
So I'd like to answer that question by sort of posing this idea. And that is that when we talk about Southern cuisine, what are we really talking about? So we started to see the emergence of what we call Southern cuisine at that particular time. And it actually incorporated foods and folkways and customs, not just the English, not just the native peoples, but more importantly, the Africans. Because there's really no difference between Southern and African American cuisine. And so just those two terms really talks about the appropriation of Blackness, of Black culture, as a factor that began very, very early on. And so this whole commemoration about 1619 is about restoring that place that Africans had in the creation and evolution of American society and culture. And so the appropriation is being identified and put in proper perspective, because we want to make sure that people understand that the English did not just create this country all by themselves, that the native peoples didn't disappear after Pocahontas died, and that the people who were of African descent played a major role not only in the evolution of this country, but in the very definition of what freedom, equality, civil rights, civil liberties was all about. Because they challenged every action, whether it was by running away, by fighting in the courts, or by fighting physically. We would see this action take place almost from the beginning. We would see it when people ran away, trying to gain their freedom. We would see it when they filed cases in court, and we would see it even in some of the revolts.
All right, Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander, history professor and dean at Norfolk University.
We're finding where she said that. She said this.
British colonies, Portuguese colonies, and elsewhere, but not in the English colony, in particular in Virginia. And so when we talk about who's arriving and whether or not they were enslaved or indentured servants or whatever, I usually like to say that they were bonded, meaning they were unfree people, because their status was really not defined until a little bit later. Usually historians trace it to about the 1640s when we started to see court cases put in place that essentially began to take away the rights and privileges of those who were in bondage but not necessarily enslaved.
So
John,
I want to go right there. So what you're saying is that during this period, so of course, post in 1619, that people of African descent had rights, and but then laws began to get changed that took away those rights, voting rights, property rights. Can you unpack that?
Sure. So the colony did not have a clear system of any kind of enslavement in place. There were no laws. In fact, Massachusetts, the Plymouth colony in particular, was the first to create laws. I believe it was in 1641 to enslave those Africans who were arriving. But in Virginia, it would take until the 1660s before we would see some clear laws put in place. Now, what we would see in these early years are Africans being treated more as servants. Now, there's a difference between an indentured servant that had a contract and those who did not. There were some English people who'd been kidnapped and made to be in bondage in the Virginia colony. As long as they didn't serve more than 20 years, that was allowed, because anything after 20 years was seen as slavery. And we would see many of the Africans who were arriving actually file freedom suits, claiming that they were Christians and they could no longer be held in bondage beyond a certain point in time. And we started to see those particular freedom suits by the 1640s, 1650s. And that suggests to us that people were trying to hold them longer than a maximum of 20 years.
Wow. Wow. Any questions for Pat?
Okay, we went through that already.
First of all, Professor Newberry, and thank you for your work.
All right, now you see that?
How?
You see that? Going back to our scriptures, this is exactly my point when it comes to the 400-year prophecy and how he tells us that that was Hosea. So I'm just going to go back to Hosea. And Hosea is, he tells them, he says that he was going to carry Israel away, and he was going to have mercy on the house of Judah, but he would only save them by Yahweh the Elohim. Now, as we look at it here, and what we went through in the first video about the study of, the blood and the sacrifice and the importance of that, particularly to the children of Israel as a whole, and it was our way of being in fellowship with the Most High without sin and abominations. The Most High is like a relationship where everything is up above board. It's all the Most High is requiring of us. There's just no guise, there's no deceit, there's no lying, there's no ill will, there's nothing but loving and caring people for each other in that society. That's it. And the as we could see in our societies, the inclusion of other gods is what causes all of the violence and evil and mistrust and cruelty and abandonment, covenant breaking, and all of the things that are rampant in our community because of who you serve. People become like the gods they serve. Simple as that. So simply saying that if Jesus was a real God, the fruit of the way the people behave under this shows that he can't be of the Most High. Christianity was like they were saying. Christianity was like, yeah, they're still slaves. We can still kill them and rape them and all that. Yeah, and they're going to be saved, but after they're dead. Most High don't speak of salvation in that manner. Most High speaks of salvation in manner of, I'm going to save you from your current and present predicament, which is where you are and where your people are suffering at and where you're being oppressed and afflicted. That's salvation. And he's saying that you're only going to be able to get there because you can see he didn't save us by the bow, didn't save us by the sword, didn't save us by the battle, didn't save us by nothing. Because he divorced us. So my point into you is you got to make a decision, particularly in this last days. Because Revelation tells you I'm going to close on this note. He laid hold of the dragon, the serpent, the devil, and all of them. And he says that this is afterwards. Now, the reason why I say that is because this is Babylon. This is what we're waiting on right here. 1 hour. Let's go through it. Babylon is fallen. It's fallen to become a habitation of devils. This is where we are right now. He's saying it's spiritually fallen before it's destroyed. It's the difference between something fallen and being destroyed. So he's telling us now to come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that you will not receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and Yahweh hath remembered her sins. And you got to remember, this is not about any other nation but America. Why? Because the scripture is specific. Look at that. And also that nation. That's singular. Okay. Let's go back. Where he says, her sins have reached heaven, and Yahweh remembered her iniquities. Reward her as she rewarded you, and double unto her according to her works in the cup which she has filled to her double. Filled to her double. The cup that she has filled to her double. How much had she glorified? How much has she glorified herself and lived deliciously? That's what we are, the lifestyle of the rich and famous stuff, you know. It says, so much torment and sorrow give her, for she saith in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and I shall see no sorrow. Therefore her plague shall come in one day, death, mourning, famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is Yahweh who judges her. The kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning. You say, what great city? This is another thing to tell you it's a nation. It's not a religion. None of these preconceived notions that Christianity teach. This is about us and our people, as the 1619 prophecy specifies. This is all of the stuff we sell, all of the merchants of the earth, these corporations. They're telling you that they ain't going to be able to sell these things to us anymore. Why is that important? Because we know that's reality. 5% of the world's population, but we consume 40% of its goods and resources. That's the living deliciously. But we throw away more food than some countries eat and have available to them on a daily basis. He said, all of the kings of the earth live deliciously with her. That lived, who have lived deliciously with her. And that's only a few. So he's telling you that all of the nations have lived deliciously with her. And we see all of the nations that got her back, they all doing good. Fine with great linen, with fine linen, purple, scarlet, decked with gold. Saying that all of this is coming to nothing. So great a riches coming to nothing. And they all cry when they see the smoke of her burning. What city is like this great city? This ain't a religion. Nobody cries when a religion. How can you burn down a religion anyway? Excuse me. How can you burn down a religion? How can a religion? Why it takes so long? You just outlaw a religion. It can be done in a second. But he's saying it takes an hour to burn this down. This is land. This is tangible. This means something real. And he said, rejoice over her, O thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets. That's us. You are male from the children of Judah, which are scattered all over the earth. Yahweh has avenged you on her. But let's get back to what I'm saying about Christianity, because this determines when he says that don't partake in her sins. Remember I was telling you about the adultery and the spiritual adultery and all of the things that they were doing in Babylon and in Samaria in the first part of this video? Well, he tells you that he says, come out of her, my people, and be not partakers of her sins. That's their sin. Her sin causes her to be immoral, whoremongers, warmongers, evil, brutal, no compassion, empathy for the poor, no welcome and making any kind of special concession for the foreigners or the strangers. Nothing. Everything that we were taught, their culture is antithetical to everything the children of Israel stood for. And when you accept Christianity and the oppressor's face who's on it, you're partaking in that sin. But let's go to where he says, and then I'm going to close. He says, and he saw the thrones that they sat upon, and the judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Yahushua and for the word of Yahweh, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither received his mark on their forehead. And that's something that ain't got nothing to do with no microchips and none of that crap. When you receive a mark in your forehead, as per the precedent set in the Old Testament, Ezekiel tells you, when somebody set a mark in their forehead, it was almost like that was the decision of whom they were going to serve. That was the faith in which their hand, their actions, their deeds, their worship, you know what I mean? That was the way that their mind and their belief system was framed upon. Meaning, like most people are upon the belief system that America is their God and their patriotism to it. So everything they do is pretty much displayed in that. All of the activities and everything they do is geared towards that. Their work and their it's almost like they're displaying the fruit of what's in their heart in terms of their purpose and what, they feel like they're on this planet to do. So at the end of the day, he's saying that this is what you dedicate yourself to. And this is in your forehead, meaning this is your soul. This is what you've dedicated yourself to. And he says it's in their hands because they've applied their hands to it, and they lived and reigned with the Messiah 1,000 years. So he's saying after Babylon is destroyed, this is what we're going to see, a resurrection. He said, but the rest of the dead did not live until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. And blessed is holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power. That means you're going from death, which is hell and Hades and torment, to the lake of fire. People need to understand that. You don't roast until you're tormented for 1,000 years. Darkness and abyss, wherever that is. He said, they shall be the priests of Yahweh and his Messiah, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So there you go. This situation is way more important than that because we are right here at the door. In 1 hour, this is where we at. And I can go into all of the different things about the daughter of Babylon. See? These are the prophecies concerning the daughter of Babylon. That's us. That's Revelation 18. So you better make up your mind whom you're going to serve. This is Dion Tyler. Shalom.